than yesterday. So, I mean, that's a good sign. By continuing the meeting. Okay. Yeah, I can say. All right. But yeah, so I think I'm fully recovered. I haven't had any symptoms or anything for a little bit, but as soon as my wife came down with it, that reset my clock for going back to work. So, yeah, I haven't been to work for just over 2 weeks, and I've got another week to go.
My spouse got his second vaccine courtesy of Uncle Sam today, so I'm really hoping he doesn't have any sort of reaction tomorrow.
Well, if you count this as a vaccine, I guess I got it courtesy of Uncle Sam too, because I picked it up at the Pentagon. I haven't really gone anywhere else, so yeah.
Well, I hope she has a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
Well, let's hope this isn't your terminal leave, Brian.
It would be. Oh yes, I see what you're saying now. But yeah, my terminal leave is going to start in 178 days. So if they started me on terminal, not the terminal leave you're talking about, if they started me on terminal leave today, I'd be happy. Like, you mean I don't have to go back ever? Okay. But,
oh man, see a lot of people still trickling in. Let it keep the flow. Let's keep the conversation going. Julie, tell us a story, Julie. You always got some really good ones.
Oh, what kind of story? Well, I was actually going to ask you if you have a nickname, like
Hutch Marina Mester.
That's what I'm like. That's where I was going. I'm like, well, but no, like different nicknames. Who has an interesting nickname?
Okay, so when I went to high school, I started at eighth grade in Jamaica. It's a technical entrance high school where you leave there with a trade, right? My trade was electrical installation, running wires in the house. But in eighth grade, there was 2 short people in the school, right? I was one of them. So I was below 5 feet until I was in, I believe, 10th grade. So I was super short. So throughout the entire school, there's another guy that was almost my height, but he was a little bit taller. So everyone that went to school with me, they call me Shata One. So it's like Jamaican way of saying the shortest one. So in case you haven't known, doesn't have any relationship with Jamaicans, you are addressed by your parents in a lot of conversation, like, hey, Blackie, hey, fatty, tall man, slim man. All right? So it's just how it is in Jamaica. So my nickname growing up was Shata One.
I think the U.S. is like one of the only places that doesn't do that. I've spent a lot of time in South America, and I mean, you walk around and they call you exactly. It's the same thing. I remember the first time I was 19 years old in Chile, and we start picking teams for a pickup soccer game, and literally there were no names in the whole mix. It was like short guy, and Chino. They call somebody a Chino because he had slanty eyes. I'm just like, and then Moreno, the dark guy, and they just started spouting out, El Gordito, the fat kid. I'm just like, and they looked at me and they called me Rubio, the blonde guy. I'm just like,
yeah,
okay.
And I think Mona can speak to this. I believe her husband is Jamaican. She probably could speak to that as well, as far as how.
Well, actually, my husband's family really doesn't do that.
No, they don't.
No. I guess because some of them were born in Jamaica, some of them were born in the States.
Okay.
So I think it just sort of melded into whatever they were doing here in the States. So. Got
you. They got Americanized, we called it.
Very quickly.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Anyone new? Natalie, have you been with us recently?
It's been a while.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Heath. Hi, Hutch. It has been a while. Probably at least, I don't know, 6 months or something from the very beginning. But hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Are we doing introductions? I'm Natalie Teramoto. My husband here is Scott. And sorry, he's on the phone. But we are in Southern California, and our market is in Phoenix, Arizona. We joined this meetup when Heath and Hutch originally started it because we were looking in Alabama as well. But then we just primarily focused on Phoenix. But I saw that you guys had Brian on, and I know that he has a great podcast, and I went to one of your meetups, and so we wanted to pop in tonight and hear about what he had to say about podcast stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Christine, I believe we connected on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you came to this meetup before.
No, this is the first time I've come to this meetup before. Sorry, I have a 1-year-old that I'm trying to have in the background over here.
Marine Corps officer, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah, one of our markets is the Southeast, and we actually just got under best and final for a property in Mobile. So we're super excited about that. Yeah.
Nice.
I know a guy that lives about 45 minutes away from Mobile.
Is that Heath?
Oh, awesome. Well,
That's
we live
Hutch.
about 40. We live in Mississippi, so we're not too far away.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Who else? Lem, have you been with us before? You're muted, brother.
Hello, yes, my name is Lem. I'm from Northern Virginia and new to pretty much real estate. I just got my real estate license back in July of 2020 and slowly found multifamily. And then I've been, listening to your podcast, Dr. Heath and Reen, and then also found Brian Briscoe's podcast. So I'm interested in this presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it.
And Brother Roberts, we connected on Clubhouse. I don't believe you had an opportunity to introduce yourself on here.
Sure. Hey, yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. Sure, I'm Robert Smith. I'm here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been licensed realtor for about 15 years, and I own several rental properties, including some multifamilies. And Hutch, thanks for inviting me, man. I had a good time this last networking event. I think we were on about a month or so ago, and I'm just glad to be here, see how I could, learn and contribute any kind of way. But I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining.
All right. I think actually, Sister Julie, I don't think you've visited us before, right? You're frozen, sis.
Oh, mom's here.
So mom's here. All right. Julie, you dropped out?
Idaho internet.
All right.
All right, Julie, we dove back to you. And I think everyone else. Darren, you've been here with us before, but I don't believe you had an opportunity to introduce yourself.
I'm Darren Bryant from Pensacola, Florida. I've been in the real estate business pretty much all my life. My dad was a developer builder, and I'm actually a licensed builder, licensed home inspector, licensed mold assessor, and I'm also a licensed realtor. My main focus is mold assessments. That's what we focus on. And the money I make in that, I offset into the real estate market. And we just closed on a portfolio of 17 units here just about 3 weeks ago. So we're moving ahead and looking for some more properties and looking for more opportunities and looking to learn.
Heck yeah, man. You're in the right place. Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. And all right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Heath Jones. My partner is Hutch the Marine Investor. We know pretty much everybody here, and thank you for showing up. Today we have an interesting talk about podcasts and downloads, but before we get started, Hutch and we co-founded H Squared Capital, and for our 2021 and 2022 goal, we are on a mission. We have started the March to 1,000 Doors campaign, in which we are looking to get 100 retired service members into apartment deals. And we think that by purchasing either through sponsorship or co-sponsorship of 1,000 Doors, that we will be able to reach that goal. In addition, we are donating 10% of all of our acquisition fees to nonprofit organizations that support our veterans. And so we're really excited to learn as much as we can as we go through this for the next 2 years. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal, but when you got a Marine riding shotgun with you, you're going to get stuff done. So, so we're super excited about that. Before we get started, we're gonna introduce Brian Briscoe. I'm sure if you're on LinkedIn and you're in the multifamily space or following anybody, then he has come up in your feed at least once or twice. He has done a great job of getting the Four Oaks Capital podcast, Diary of the Apartment Investor, up and running, and they are just crushing it. I've had the talk with someone before where they're like, oh yeah, I saw you had a podcast, but you hear one podcast, you've heard them all. And, but there, to that point, one thing that they did is they made a very unique format, and we'll let Brian talk more about that as he gets into what's going on. If you haven't heard it, you should definitely go check it out. And we'll be doing some networking after Brian's done with his presentation. Julie Holly's on. She has a podcast as well, Ask Me How I Know, and it is a great podcast. So lots of good stuff here today. Hope you enjoy the networking. Hutch, you got anything else? Did I hit all of our bullets?
No, I think you covered it, man.
Excellent. So without further ado, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today, and pretty excited to hear what you have to say, man.
Awesome. Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So if you don't mind, I'll just give you a little background. Ignore this. I probably should have shaved. I think 19 and a half years I've been told I'm a Marine every day, and I really should have. But, I apologize for, any military person present, but call me nasty later, just go ahead. But there's a reason behind it. And just full disclosure, I am also have kid watching duty right now. Right now, the kids are all tucked in, and they got their little devices in front of them, so we should be okay. My wife has COVID, and she's in her bedroom all day, but we should be good. And I have not left my house in literally 3 weeks, so I decided to take advantage of that time a little bit. But that said, I've been active duty Marine, like I said, for 19 and a half years. I have a approved retirement date, and I've got about 178 days still in the Marine Corps active duty until I'm on the retired list. And part of my story, I think, hinges around that. My actual retirement date is going to be in October of 2021, and it's not a coincidence that that's 20 years after September 11th, almost to the date. Okay, so that's basically when I decided to go active duty was, on September 12th, but may have been in the evening on September 11th. But along the way, I started investing in single family homes. I had this idea that, hey, as long as I'm in the military, I'm going to move every 2 to 3 years. I can get this owner-occupant loan on stuff. And, that's just a really good way to build a portfolio of real estate. And after, 15 or so years, it wasn't quite scaling exactly how I wanted it to scale. I kind of had this idea that after 20 years in the Marine Corps, I'd have enough, rental income coming in from these single family properties that I'd be set for life. Didn't quite happen that way, but we were able to get proof of concept. We were able to show that, hey, some areas we have properties that are cash flowing quite a bit. In other areas, we have properties that are appreciating a bit, and we ended up making money on every single property. Just it wasn't going as fast as I had imagined. So along the way, I was looking for ways to be able to scale it, do everything that I was doing, faster. And, lo and behold, I find, multifamily. And incidentally, it was really podcasts that got me doing what I am doing, and so it's fun to talk about the subject of podcasts because, you know, I read a book once upon a time. This is, I'll try to make this part brief to get into the meat, but I was deployed. I was on a ship and I was in the middle of, a big body of water somewhere on the other side of the world. And I read a book by Bigger Pockets guys, Brandon Turner. And he talked about how he bought a 24 unit with almost no money down. And that's right at the time where I was, in this hunt for, how am I going to, how am I going to figure out the scaling thing? How am I going to take the single family thing and turn it into a lucrative business? And I came across this book and I'm like, oh my gosh, multifamily is the way to go. And I remember in that book, he suggested podcasts. Now I was in a spot where I didn't have any internet. So, I waited a couple months till I was, back in the US, and I started listening to Michael Blanc and Rod Cleef and Kevin Buck for a while until I decided that I didn't want to do mobile home parks. But I was listening to podcast after podcast after podcast, and I was reading books. Everywhere I was going, there was a podcast in the background. If I was on my motorcycle going to and from work, I had my earbuds in and I was listening to a podcast. If I was at the gym, I had my earbuds in and I was listening to a podcast. If I was going for a run, guess what? I had my earbuds in and I was listening to a podcast. But it was so influential in how I got to this point, that it was something that, quite frankly, I never really thought of doing it. But Heath mentioned we have a different format. So Four Oaks, we all came together a couple of years ago, and in one of our, there was one weekend where we all got together and we were just talking about, our plans for the future, and we decided to do a podcast. And this happened to be, the day before a big Michael Blanc event in Dallas. Okay, that's where I met. I think it's where I met Heath for the first time. I know it's where I met Hutch for the first time. But we're at this big event, and we're like, we're going to launch a podcast. All right, and then we go in, and the next day, we showed up 2 days early to do our team building stuff. But then we start going to the event, and everybody there is like, yeah, I just launched a podcast, or I'm launching a podcast next month, or hey, we're going to have a podcast, and all of a sudden, our idea of doing the same thing Michael Blanc does, or the same thing Rod Cleef did, where you interview a professional and you put it on the airwaves, all of a sudden didn't sound as appealing as it once had, and we were just like, oh my gosh, everybody else is doing exactly the same thing. And we sat down and we decided that we need to do something different. All right. And hold on, I gotta fix my green screen so my headphones don't disappear. I think that's better, right? Sorry about that. So we went back to the drawing board is what we did. Okay, we sat down, we said, how can we be different? How can we do something slightly differently? Just enough different that the people are going to pay attention to our podcast. All right, and I'm gonna start the let's see, I got a PowerPoint here. And here we go. All right. Do you guys see the PowerPoint full screen? Okay, Hutch, I can see it. Okay, good. Yep. All right. And Hutch and Heath, if you do me a favor, I can't see the chat box. If there's any big questions that come up, just step in and let me know. But so what we decided to do was bring two guests onto every episode, which is a little different than everybody else. And if you look at the guests on here, one of the guests was a very experienced investor. All right. This one right here, if you can see the mouse, this guy here on the top right, he owns $1 billion worth of multifamily. All right. This guy right here was the investor relations for Michael Blanc. All right. Corey Peterson, he has thousands of doors and has made millions of dollars many times over. And here's our own Julie Holly right here. And Monique is crushing it in real estate as well. Obviously, Hutch has been on the hot podcast as well. But the point is we wanted to be a little bit different, come at it from a different angle, and give people a slightly different take on what a podcast could be. Now I'll talk a little bit later about, why, but something that's going to be a common theme is everything needs to be aligned with what your goal is. All right. But so that's our format, and we call it the Ask the Expert episode. And we talk to the first half of the podcast is roughly similar to any other podcast, where we're talking to the experienced investor about what they've done. And at about the halfway point, we introduce the aspiring investor. And basically, towards the end, I turn the mic over to the aspiring investor and say, all right, you got questions, start asking. Okay. And the point is, it's like live mentoring, live coaching, and we record it and turn it into a podcast is all it is. So that's what's different. Here's how we've done. This is our month by month. So you notice, and when I get towards the very end, we're going to talk about making Apple's new and noteworthy list. I kind of shot ourselves in the foot because I actually started the podcast in May. All right. The official launch date, I didn't drop any episodes until July. So when we talk about new and noteworthy, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I basically took us out of the running of anything new and noteworthy. But you can see, July, we dropped a ton of episodes in, and we had more episodes in July than August, which is probably why we had a little bigger hump. Went down in August, but every single month since, we've had a steady climb up to where, 3 months in a row, we've had over 5,000 listeners. So, that's where we've come. And, so far it's been fun, which is great. Here's where to find out more about us. The company is Four Oaks Capital. It's very simple, fouroakscapital.com. We were able to find a name where the domain was also available, and then the podcast diary of an apartment investor.com, right? But and then if you guys want to contact me, the email address Brian Briscoe at fouroakscapital.com, super easy. All right, but actually I forgot about this. Now I'm going to have to bring the chat screen up. Okay, here we go. Yeah, where's that chat screen? Come on. Oh, here it is. There we go. So here's what I want you to do. Using the chat screen, if you've ever considered starting a podcast, type the letter Y in, and if not, the letter N. I just want to know kind of what we're dealing with here. Of course, Heath has. Yep. Okay. Oh, Alex, yes, but not for multifamily. We're actually going to talk about that. Okay. So a lot of yeses. Okay, good. I guess I should have said put an A in there if you already have one, so that, Julie, Heath, and Hutch, and anybody else, if anybody else already has a podcast, type the letter A in there right now. All right. Good. So good. So a lot of Y's, a couple of N's. All right. Mona does as well. Good. All right. So the other thing I want to do, since this is a multifamily real estate thing, I want to get a gauge of, who's in the room. So all that apply, for example, I would put B, C, and I would put B and C in there. And actually D. So go ahead and let's see, A, C, and D, B's, okay. A and C, okay. Got it. All right, that's just to help me get an idea of who's in the room and what we're, so I know kind of how to focus the things that are not set in stone. Okay, a couple of B's, good. All right. Okay, thanks for that. So here's something that's, I pulled up some stats. All right, and this is just the Google podcast stats. Take the first article that popped up. Okay, so I can't guarantee any of these are right. And actually, as I was going through the stats, a lot of them seem to contradict each other. So I'm just throwing these out as, I didn't collect this. It's probably right. Okay, but 850,000 different podcasts out there with 30 million total episodes. That's a lot. Yeah, right. That's a lot is the answer. Average episode has about 50 downloads. So if you look at all of the podcast downloads divided by the 30 million in episodes, you get about 50 downloads each. 51% of Americans in the last year have listened to at least one podcast. All right. Now, the average podcast listener, and here's where the numbers get weird. I don't know what they call an average podcast listener, but the average podcast listener is subscribed to 6 different shows and will listen to a total of 7 hours a week of podcasts. All right. And they're most likely to listen. The number one place where they listen is at home. And the number 2 place where people listen is while driving. Okay. And the vast majority of people listen to their podcasts on one of these. All right. A mobile device. As a matter of fact, this is an iPhone. The vast majority of people will listen on iPhones. So if you look at the number one podcast app is Apple Podcasts, and the vast majority of people are listening to the podcast on iPhones. So if you tailor a lot of your marketing to iPhone, you're getting most people, greater than 50% at least. But don't forget about the people who are on Google and the treadmill. Okay, yeah. So treadmill, great place to listen. I have a rowing machine right there and an elliptical in the other room, and I do a lot of podcast listening on those too. All right. So, and then 1 billion in ad revenue from podcasts. And this is where podcasts are lagging behind other forms of media, but 15 billion is what YouTube, just by comparison. So the thing about podcasts is these numbers are growing year over year, and more people listening to podcasts. This number, 51% of Americans listening to podcasts last year was in the 40s. All right. So that number is growing. And the amount of time people spend listening to podcasts is also growing. So it is a market where more and more people are listening, and they're listening more frequently in a lot of cases. So it is something where, since it's a growing market, it's not too late to get in, is what I'm saying. Okay. It's like planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. All right. I think it's the same thing with podcasts. The best time to start a podcast would have been, 5 or 8 years ago, because, by now you'd have reached, Rod Cleef, Michael Blanc, bigger pocket status. But anyway, I think the first question everybody should ask is, should you start a podcast? All right. There's lots of reasons to do a podcast. Now, we're a multifamily investing group, so I'm going to tailor all my comments to multifamily. Okay. Why start a podcast? Well, Corey Peterson, a guy that I really like, he wrote a book that's literally called Copy Your Way to Success. I mean, not very original. And he says, don't be original. He's like, don't be the guy that goes out and thinks. Just find someone else who is doing something that works and copy what they're doing. All right. Joe Fairless, Michael Blanc, Rod Cleef, Corey Peterson, a lot of other people have built businesses, from their podcast. I mean, their podcast wasn't what started the business, but the podcast has helped them to grow their business to a point right now that's, for a lot of people would look at it and say, wow, I can never get there. Okay. But 4 Oaks is going to get there. Joe Fairless at one of his best ever conferences, I wasn't there, but I heard he put up on the screen that he was making, a 7-figure income from 4 or 5 different areas. And his podcast was one of them that was bringing in, 7 figures. But anyway, I think a podcast, the second bullet, it's part of a platform. I don't think it's going to be like the only leg that holds up your platform table. All right. But it's part of, a platform that can help you build a business and attract more people. One thing that a podcast is really good for is establishing yourself as an expert. Okay. And a lot of people, when they come to us, all right, so we're multifamily investors. I think most of us are syndicators. People want to know whether or not you're trustworthy. Okay. Now, anybody can start a podcast. Quite frankly, it takes, you probably start a podcast in less than 20 minutes and, get a 10-minute episode launched in that 20-minute time frame. All right. But for some reason, if you have a podcast that's well established, it's been putting out episode after episode after episode, all right, that does establish some sort of credibility. So a lot of people, I think, will launch podcasts for that reason. And then the other thing is, if you're doing a podcast with guests, you're going to network and learn. I talked to Whitney Sewell a while ago. He's done 800 podcast episodes, has done a daily podcast for about 2.5, almost 3 years now. And one thing he told me specifically was, if I had had 0 downloads, the podcast still would have been worth it. All right. And the other thing he shared with me is he spends almost $30,000 a month running his podcast. Not kidding. 30? I might have an extra 0 on that. 30 episodes, $100, $3,000 a month. Sorry. So like $35,000, $36,000 a year on that podcast. But he says, just from the conversations I have had with 800 different people, the amount that I have learned, it has well been worth the expense. So, and going along those lines, if you're, up and coming in this field and you want to talk to somebody who's an expert and get advice, and you email him, her, or text him or her or whatever and say, hey, can I get on the phone with you for 30 minutes to pick your brain? Yeah, you're probably not going to get a lot of yeses. Okay. If you email somebody and say, hey, I've got a podcast, can we talk for 30 minutes and I'll record it, and then I'll take that recording and launch it as a podcast, you're probably going to get a yes every time. Okay. So it's a good way to get people to sit down and talk with you. All right. So that's one reason. Now there's also reasons not to start a podcast. And, I'll use Joe Fairless, Rod Cleef, and Michael Blanca as an example here too. Their podcasts are part of their funnels, going into their program, which involves a lot of coaching and mentorship and, high dollar conferences. That's their purpose. Okay. If that's not your purpose, maybe you shouldn't do the same thing they're doing. All right. The podcast by itself is not going to make you any money. In order to get the podcast to actually be self-sufficient, you got to get a whole lot of downloads. And, multifamily, now you don't have to have a multifamily podcast. Once again, we'll talk about that later, but multifamily is a niche enough subject that you're probably never going to get enough downloads for it to monetize by itself. And then the other thing I said, is this market flooded? I don't know. Is it hard to set yourself apart? It can be. There's a lot of work going into putting it together. And the middle bullet, I probably should have put last. If you don't set your podcast up properly, you're going to waste a lot of time and money in putting everything together. So, incidentally, one thing that our podcast, and I'll talk more about this later, but this is our website traffic right here. And this is from, I think, May 1st to August 31st of last year. Okay. Our podcast launched right here. Okay. July 1st is when our podcast launched. All right. And we did quite a bit of marketing trying to get that podcast, incidentally, all free marketing, trying to get that podcast out. And if you'll look, over here, and I actually split it up into 2 different periods to look at the number, the difference between the 2 months prior to the podcast and 2 months after the podcast, we had basically 2.5 times the amount of hits in the 2 months on our website. So in the first 2 months, and incidentally, going back to this video, that's this month here and this month here. Okay. In the first 2 months, it almost doubled the traffic that hit our website. Okay. Which part of our funnel, our podcast is supposed to basically divert traffic to our website. We want to be able to catch people's email addresses. And, we had a couple of free giveaways here and there where and when you go to our website, up front and center, you're going to see, the first thing you see is schedule a call with us or click here to contact us. All right. So the goal, and this is part of the alignment, the podcast is supposed to send everybody to the website, and the main purpose of the website is to capture contact information. And we have everything lined up so that it all fits together, as good as possible. It's not perfect yet. And incidentally, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in the next, let's see, gotta get my timer up. So I'm not, how long do I got? Another 20 minutes till 9, my time?
Yeah, you're good. You got 22 minutes.
Okay, good. Still on track. All right. Anyway, you want, I forgot what I was saying. So whatever it was, I'll talk about it later, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah, so make sure everything's aligned, I think. So here's some factors to consider building a podcast. There's going to be a lot of time. All right. It took me probably 20 to 30 hours, maybe more, trying to get the podcast set up. And this is just like administrative stuff. Okay. Make sure it's listed in all the directories. Make sure you can find it on Apple, on Google, on Spotify, on, Stitcher, on all the different directories. Another thing is, if you're doing your own editing, and Julie and I were actually on the phone talking about this, probably 5 or 6 hours ago, it takes a long time. I was averaging about 5 hours per episode for a 30 to 40 minute episode. And, we're releasing 2 to 3 a week right now. So, if you think about that, that's almost a full-time job by itself. And, the guys like Whitney Sewell and Joe Fairless who are doing a daily podcast, that podcast by itself is one full-time job. If you're only doing one episode a week, it's a little better. But Heath and Hutch, do you guys still do your own editing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. How much time do you guys spend per episode? All included.
You're spot on. Ours, we aimed at first to do just 30-minute episodes to make it a little bit more digestible. But when you're getting good stuff from people, you don't
let it roll.
Don't want to put it off. And so our average length is probably like 45 minutes to an hour. And, depending on how eloquent and good of a speaker that the guest is, that's 3 people that you got to clean up as opposed to just touching me, which
yeah.
So a lot of those things to consider as well whenever you're trying to get things together. And it's a lot easier when everything flows from start to finish. But if there's times where it's like, oh, hey, I forgot to say this. Can I put this back before I said this part? And we're like, yeah, no problem. Or Hutch is like, yeah, Heath will take care of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I incidentally, just today, I got an email from somebody that I interviewed on Friday, and she said, I said this, but I probably shouldn't have, for many reasons. Can you go back and edit that out? But there's a lot of edits that you're going to do, post-recording. But yeah, when you talk about scheduling, recording, editing, uploading, posting, marketing, you're probably going to spend about 5 hours per episode. And it takes a lot of time. Cost, you can spend as much or as little as you want, but it can get very expensive. Most hosting services are going to charge a monthly fee. Okay, we pay about 20 to 25 bucks. Actually a little more because we have this little thing called Magic Mastering on top. All right, our website's, another $45 a month, not including startup costs. And I have since outsourced the editing of my podcast. And we're paying about $50 an episode. So when you're setting up a podcast, just realize that there's a big time factor and there's a big cost factor. And you can offload some of the time, but it's going to cost you. And so one of the factors to consider about podcasting is, what's the benefit you're going to get from the podcast? And I think there's substantial benefits out there, but are there other ways for you to get the same benefit? And the other question I'd ask is a podcast actually playing to your strengths? Okay. If it's not playing to your strengths, you probably should think about another way to do it. And oh, by the way, for every Rod Cleef and Michael Blanc there is out there, there's probably a dozen syndicators who don't have podcasts who are doing amazing things. Okay. So it's not the panacea. It's not, the end all be all, but it is a very good tool that you can use to grow your business. So let's say you've decided to do a podcast. One thing you want to do is optimize the podcast to your business. Okay. So one thing that I would do, and we actually, sat down with one of these professional podcast marketers and talked out the structure of the podcast. So the first thing you should do is define what is the objective of your podcast. All right. Incidentally, our podcast name, Diary of the Apartment Investor, was the only thing that survived that first conversation that, the Four Oaks guys had when we came up with the podcast. We didn't do this purpose. We didn't talk about how it fit into the business plan. We just thought, hey, it'd be really cool to start a podcast. And it was actually going to be very much a diary-like format. And then we changed the format. We kept the name, but, it ended up working. But the first thing you should do, I think, is figure out what the objective is going to be. All right. It's going to save yourself a lot of time later. Now, Adam Adams, he's doing a lot of, podcast coaching now. He gives an example. He was on my meetup a couple months ago, but he gives an example of his podcast, and I've heard it several other places, but he did a creative real estate podcast. And he did it for 3 or 4 years. And he said he was averaging, like 600 downloads a day, which is a lot more than I'm getting. But I'm getting about 200 a day. But he was averaging like 600 podcast downloads a day, top, I don't know what. But anyway, very highly rated podcast. And he said one day he realized that it wasn't helping him with his multifamily business. All right. So he ended up selling the podcast to somebody else and doing something that focused on his business. But you need to make sure that everything's aligned, or the podcast is going to be a waste of time and money. So make sure it fits. Figure out how this is going to fit into your overall business plan. A lot of people talk about a funnel. You're bringing people into the business through this funnel. A lot of times the podcast is the wide end of the funnel. Okay, it doesn't have to be. There's other ways you can structure your podcast, but for a lot of people, it's the wide end of the funnel. And you want to make sure that that funnel is aligned with the rest of your business plan. All right. So thinking about that, a lot of people talk about this avatar. Okay. What is an avatar? Well, it's your target listener. It's the person you are talking to. And I would suggest spending a lot of time sitting down and thinking, what is this person like? How old are they? All right. Is it a gender specific? All right. Do they have a specific profession? All right. And try to figure out maybe listening habits. And what you're going to do is when you set up your actual podcast, you're going to tailor your podcast to make sure it fits your purpose, it aligns with your business plan, and it speaks to your avatar. All right. And if you can do all of that, your podcast is much more likely to work for you. And if you can, try to do some market research. Okay. I did some very informal market research. When we launched the podcast, I had somewhat of a LinkedIn following, and there's probably, the whole month of June, I probably had 6 or 8 different posts just asking questions. Hey, what do you think about X? And that was my informal market research and just looking at the answers. And some of those questions got lots and lots and lots of answers. So, I kind of looked at that and I learned, I'm like, okay, good. Made some tweaks here and there. And, I did a lot of that trying to figure out how to structure the podcast and how to make it appeal to the person I want it to appeal to. All right. And design the podcast to reach your avatar. Okay. So, and here's where I'm going to talk about your subject. Okay. Let's say we're all multifamily syndicators. I know some people are in different businesses, and a lot of people want to use the podcast to attract passive investors. Okay. Does a podcast that interviews multifamily syndicators typically attract passive investors? Okay. The answer is no. Okay. The majority of people that listen to my podcast are not people who want to invest. They're people who want to be like me. Okay. They want to be a syndicator and not a passive investor. All right. So when you're looking at your podcast and the subject of your podcast, you've got to think about that avatar and what you want that avatar to do. If you are looking for potential passive investors, then design that for passive investors. And maybe you want to do a slightly different subject. Other people I know have had, like Dan Hanford does a podcast on entrepreneurship. I know other people who are in the multifamily space that do podcasts on other financial topics. So, in one way, you want to niche down and get as specific as possible to that avatar. But at the same time, you just got to realize what you want that avatar to do and what topics can you put in front of him or her to get that desired goal. All right. So now what we want to do, just incidentally, our goal is to build a community. Okay. And we had this idea a long time ago, is we want to build a community of investors. And so the podcast that we designed was, we're bringing in an aspiring investor and we're bringing in an experienced investor, because we want our community to have a lot of both. All right. We want it to be a place where aspiring investors can come and learn from people with more experience. And so the type of person that is attracted to our community is mostly the aspiring investors. But we are also building relationships with a lot of experienced investors that will also become part of that community. And that's really what our goal is with the podcast. That's how it fits into the rest of our business plan. All right. That said, and then when you're designing things, you want to make sure you do a little bit of search engine optimization, and you think, what is your avatar going to search for on Google? Okay. And, think about how that works. Are they going to search for apartment investor or something else? We specifically did not put multifamily in our podcast, and we specifically did not put syndication in our podcast, because those are some terms that are a little more obscure. Okay, it doesn't mean that you can't name your podcast something else. There's a lot of podcasts that are very successful that have names that don't quite follow it, but that's just one tip on how to do it. All right, design, and I'll just go over this really quickly. Your logo needs to grab attention. Your format, most people are going to do interviews, but you can also do monologues or a combination. Julie and I both do the same thing on our podcasts. I said Hutch did his thing there, but Julie and I have two different types of episodes. We have shorter episodes, and then we have the interview episodes. So it's something that reaches different people at different times. Sometimes you're listening to a podcast, you have 12 minutes, and look, Brian and Julie both have an episode that you can listen to under 12 minutes. So the design comes into, once again, what does your avatar do on average? My avatar on average is a working professional that commutes and is going to have about a 30-minute drive, which is the average commute time for an American professional. So I try to keep my podcast so they can put it on 1.25 speed, which most people do, and listen to the podcast. All right, getting into marketing. I've talked way too much already. So one thing that's really important is getting the word out. Okay, remember 850,000 podcasts. All right, so if you just gin up your podcast, do all the legwork behind it, get it distributed to all of these, podcast directories, nobody's going to find it. It's going to be needle in a haystack. So you need to make sure that you're getting the word out. Otherwise, I thought that was funny when I wrote it. Just you and your mother will be listening to it. But my mom doesn't listen to my podcast. So if you got your mother listening, you're probably better off than me. But there's a lot of low-cost ways to advertise. All right, text people. And texting is better than email getting people to listen. Why? Because most people listen to podcasts with their phone. All right. And if you text them a link to your podcast on Apple Podcasts, and they have an iPhone, it is so easy for them to just tap, and there's the podcast. All right. If you email it to them and they're sitting at their desktop, maybe they listen to it, maybe they don't. All right. Text people the link. It's so easy, and a lot of people will do it. Okay. You can also email everybody. I'm not saying don't do it. Another great place is social media groups that are aligned with your podcast subject. Okay, so if there's a social media group that allows self-promotion, you're not going to get kicked out for trying to spam people. Okay, drop your podcast in there. Hey, I'm starting a podcast. And then in general, word of mouth. Call people, tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing. Text them, hey, tell your friends, this is what I'm doing. If you know anybody else that's interested, let them know. There's also ways to pay for advertising. Once again, make sure you're always targeting your avatar. And we're going to talk more about this later. So, all right, launching. I think the launching part is kind of probably not the most important thing for what we're talking about. Whoops. How do I stop that? There we go. All right. So I was going to talk about, mixing and putting your music in, whatever. All right, let's skip the launching and let's just hit this is the good stuff. All right. So how do you boost your listenership? How do you go from, opening day where you're starting with 17 downloads per episode to where you're getting almost, 100 to 150. That's where I'm at right now. When I release a podcast episode, I'm getting somewhere between 100 and 150 downloads of that episode on the day it's launched, which is better than a lot, but it pales in comparison when you compare it to like the Michael Blancs and Joe Fairlesses of the world. But okay, here's the number one thing. You've got to put in good content. All right, that's the number one thing to getting people to listen is the content. You want your listeners to be repeat listeners. All right. There we go. You want your listeners to be repeat listeners. You want your listeners to tell a friend, and you want them to rate and review. And we'll talk a little bit more about how those ratings and reviews help out. All right. Now back to the new and noteworthy section. This is kind of I think everybody's goal. Now, if your podcast has already been out for 90 days, you're out of the running. Okay. But Apple will highlight new and noteworthy podcasts within the first 90 days. Remember back when I said I started my podcast in Monday? I mean, I was worried about getting things done on time and being able to launch on the right day. So 45 days before our targeted launch date, I set everything up. All right. And then I had 0 episodes and 0 downloads for 45 days. But to get new and noteworthy, Apple doesn't publish their algorithms, but most people who study it will say it's related to number of downloads, the number of ratings, 5-star ratings, and the number of reviews. Okay, the more of each of these that you get, the more likely you are to be highlighted in your specific category as new and noteworthy. And what does that mean? That means Apple is advertising for you. Apple is going to take your podcast and put it in front of more and more and more people. Okay, and that's kind of like the holy grail of doing it. And I know Adam Adams is, that's kind of the basis of his podcast coaching course is to get on Apple's new and noteworthy. All right. So, and here's something else that you want to try to do. Okay. The screenshot on the left is from my phone. Okay. I went to a podcast that I normally listen to and scrolled down. And a lot of times when you're done listening to an episode, that's what you see. Episodes you might like, shows you might like, and it's all based on your listening. Okay. Once again, it's an algorithm thing. Okay. Apple's going to look at what other people like, and they're going to compare it to what you like. And you want to have your podcast episode up there. Okay. How do you get there? Ratings and reviews. Okay. That's really it. Downloads, ratings, and reviews. If you can get more people to rate your podcast, the better you're going to be. All right. So if you're running a podcast, text everybody you know and ask them to rate your podcast. Once again, texts work better than emails. Okay. Text them, send them the link and say, rate my podcast. Okay. Incidentally, Apple is really the only directory that allows you to rate right now. So, convince them somehow to go on. I mean, I had a couple of people, when I texted a bunch of people, respond and say, I don't have an iPhone. Well, guess what? I sent them the link to the Apple podcast where they can, and I had one guy, he's been a friend of mine for a long time, actually created an account with Apple Podcasts, put iTunes on his computer, and gave me a rating and review. But it's possible, but I don't think everybody's going to do that for you. All right, so here's something else. Okay, get your guests involved as well. All right, and here's where I'm going to say your episode art matters. All right, let's see. Okay. I haven't updated this in a while, but this is part of our website where we have all the podcasts that we've been on. Okay. And I just want to say, look at, this is what the podcasters have sent us as far as, what to share. Okay. And if you kind of look at this,
we just still see your PowerPoint.
What's that?
We still just see it's in editor mode.
Okay. Hold on. All right. So I think let me just share this. Oh, I know what I did. I shared the app and not okay. Can you guys see the website now?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks, Heath. All right. So this is the episode art that people have sent me and I've just posted. Okay. So if you think about it, look over here. All right. I like Nick Walters. All right. But which one am I more likely to send out to my friends? This, sorry, shot right here with a picture of Nick, or this one from the How Do They Do It episode with my picture. All right. And over here you have the one that Julie Holly did. Okay. Once again, you got a big picture of me on it. So, sorry. Wow. I got something in my throat, you know, and then here's, I know, right? This just brings a tear to my eye, seeing that beautiful man so many times over and over again. All right. You know, here's, you know, Heath and Hutch's podcast, and they've got Eric, my partner, you know, front and center. So your episode art matters. Make it easy for somebody to share. All right. This is one that I don't really care for. All right. You got a really, really, really big Michael Blanc picture. I like the guy a lot. I really do. And the itty bitty Brian Briscoe picture. All right. I had a hard time sharing that. I'm just like, come on, you could at least made my picture a little bigger. That's literally what I thought when he sent that to me. You know, I was like, but guess what? It was Michael Blanc. So I shared it all over the place. But you look through this, you know, hey, these guys are handsome. Okay. I wasn't very excited about sharing this, and I probably didn't. You know what I'm saying? Active duty passive income, just their logo. All right. So when you're doing episode art, if you're looking for people, the people who come on your podcast are going to be your biggest marketers, because most of them can be easily convinced to make a social media post or two and share your podcast episode. So make it easy for them. All right. Now we should go back to the PowerPoint. All right. Can you guys all see the PowerPoint now? All right. So make it easy for them to share and tag them when you share, because what that's going to do is once you tag them, they're more likely to go on and click like or comment. All right. And when they like or comment, all of a sudden Facebook and LinkedIn is going to start showing that post to all the people in their networks. And I mean, you may get 1 or 2 or 3 people who, you know, latch onto you after or listen to your podcast every time one of these guys shares. Now, incidentally, part of my market research was asking other people what episode got the most downloads. And I was also thinking, you know, who shares the most? Okay, so if I have Michael Blanc on my show, is he going to share the podcast episode art? No. Is Rod Cleve? No. Okay, is Joe Fairless? No. Okay, so if you look at my guest list, it was a bunch of really good people that were kind of in that middle category. Okay, not the rock stars. And I did that on purpose. I haven't brought if I called Michael Blanc today and say, come on my podcast, he's going to do it. All right. Rod Cleve would do it for us. All right. I don't have a relationship with Joe Fairless, but I bet I could get him on my podcast too. But the point is, you know, go for the people who are more likely to share and get them to share. All right. Eventually, I'll start bringing some bigger names on my podcast because it's going to be well established, and the name recognition at that point would help. Okay. But my goal was to get more people to share, and not so much, you know, hey, look at me, I just talked to whatever, Jake and Gino. Gino's probably one of the bigger guys I've had on the podcast. That was just last week. It'll air in a week or so. All right. And then social media, post it everywhere. Okay. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And in the last month or so, we've just ramped up our social media sharing. And there's sites like, you know, Hootsuite and Buffer that make this super easy. Okay. You just go in and you share it, and you do it once and it posts everywhere. All right. You have to do stories differently, but end of the day, you know, post it everywhere, you know, keep it in the forefront of people's minds, you know, that way, you know, when they're going to, you know, listen, when they're going on a run, they're like, oh, I just saw that Brian brought so-and-so on the podcast. I'm going to go listen to that. Okay. And the other thing that I would say, and this is also something Julie and I talked about earlier today, is if you're doing your podcast on Zoom, record it, you know, record a video and then use the video. All right. This is something that we are I wish we would have started when we started the podcast. But we're working on right now is getting the video editing up to speed. And we are going to start a YouTube channel with the podcast as well. And we're going to do video clips. We've done a couple already, but we just haven't quite ironed it out yet. It's a work in progress for us. But promotional video clips that you can put on Instagram as reels. All right. A lot of people will sit on Instagram and just go through and, oh, there's a video, and watch the Instagram reel. So, figure out, once again, this is all based on your avatar. And when we first did this, my avatar lived mostly on LinkedIn. And so we did most of our advertising on LinkedIn. But what I realized is it's so easy to duplicate the same posts on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter that you might as well just do it. All right. And then here's a time of day hack. Okay. So if you got your phone, pull out your phone and go to your podcast, your favorite podcast app. All right. I'm gonna go to my favorite podcast. Where did I put my phone? I just put it down. Okay, here it is. All right. Not sure if you guys are going to see the phone on the camera, but I'm going to try. Okay, Apple Podcasts. All right. When you go to your library, all right, you can see my ring light. Let me turn that ring light down. All right. When you go to your library, it says recently added, and it lists things by recently added. And you can see Rod Cleef just beat me out. All right. But number 2 is Diary of an Apartment Investor. All right. You want to be at the top of the list. Okay. Here's a little hack. You guys can all see this Diary of an Apartment Investor in front of me. I don't know if you guys saw what I just did, but I kind of did it unconsciously while I was doing it. I just changed my publish time. You know what that does? That brings my podcast to the top of the stack, because Apple is going to look at this publish time when determining who gets at the top of the stack. All right. So when I'm walking out of the Pentagon every day to begin my commute on the East Coast, one thing that's in my routine is I pull my phone out, I go to Buzzsprout, and I reset my publish time. And that way, when people are in their car going on a commute, at 4:30, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, guess whose podcast is at the top of the stack? Okay. And I've done some comparisons on the days I've done this and the days that I don't. And it can be up to a 30 or 40, per day swing. Okay. But
that's a freaking ninja tip, man.
What's that?
Is this just on the days you publish it? When does the original publish time, and then how often do you reset the?
So when I'm at the Pentagon, so I launch podcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday. All right. I also do a Throwback Thursday episode. Okay. Guess why I do that Throwback Thursday episode? To bring my podcast to the top of the stack. Okay. So every Thursday, I will go back into the archives and I'll pull an episode up that, hasn't seen the light of day for a while. It's kind of been on the shelf, gathering dust, maybe hasn't, people don't, swipe, they only swipe down so far before they tap something to listen. They're not going to go 60 episodes deep to find something to listen. All right. So I'll go down 60 episodes deep every Wednesday night and set it to air Thursday morning at 6 a.m. All right. And that way, when somebody gets up to go on a run, guess what's at the top of the stack? And I'm not super good at this, but once or twice a day, I'll just go on and I'll update it. All right. When I was, still able to leave my house and go to the Pentagon, I was walking out of the Pentagon like clockwork between 4:30 and 5 p.m. And so like clockwork, I would sit in my car and, usually I'd reset it. So Buzzsprout lets you reset on the hour. They don't let you reset it to the minute. But I get to my car at 4:30 and I'd reset it to 4 o'clock. I get in my car and I'd drive home, and I'd get home about 5:05, 5:10. And right when I pulled into my driveway, I'll pull my phone out again, go to Buzzsprout, reset the clock. And so everybody on the East Coast is leaving between 4 and 5, mine's at the top. And then I reset it at 5 o'clock. And so everybody in Central Time Zone that's leaving their job, between 4 and 5, has it right at the top. All right.
That's freaking ninja, man. That's a ninja tip.
Yeah. So not only are you putting 3 episodes out a week, you're then republishing one you've already done on Thursday.
And I'm bringing one to the top of the stack. I'm bringing a multifamily brief episode to the top of the stack every Tuesday as well.
And you do that just by unpublishing and then republishing for that day
So,
and time.
so yeah, if you're looking at my screen, here's how you do it. You don't have to unpublish. You just hit the edit button, and this is Buzzsprout. Okay, I just reset it for 10 a.m. Okay, but I'm gonna hit cancel because I want it to be the top of the stack. But yeah, you just reset the time. So if I go into an older episode, all right. So let's say I want to bring structuring your deal to the top of the stack. I'll just hit the today button. Today is February 1st, 5 p.m. I hit publish. There it is. And this should be, it takes a little while for this to percolate and to trickle down. But, once this hits Apple, you look at your phone, the number one podcast that you'll see is the one that released this morning. This will be number 2 in the line. So yeah, tomorrow morning, actually, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to reset this for tomorrow morning. And like I said, every Tuesday, I will bring a multifamily brief episode to the front. I randomly selected that one. Hey, guess what? That's the one that's coming to the front tomorrow. So tomorrow at 6 a.m., this is going to come up and people are going to see it like it was new. All right. Now, if you've already listened to this on your phone, so my phone automatically deletes episodes that I've already listened to. All right. So on my phone, this will not come up to the top if I've already listened to it. But people who haven't listened to it, it's going to be like it's brand new to them. All right. So if you got a podcast, don't tell anybody else. All right. Let's keep it inside this group so we're not increasing the competition. Right. But, that's probably the best hack I have figured out is just reset that time.
I'm already texting my production team. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, no, but that's it. And I do it specifically at the commute time because I did a little bit of research on that. It's like, when do people listen to the podcast the most? And, I would look at Buzzsprout and I would just refresh every couple of hours, and I'd have a trickle. And then between 4 and 7 o'clock, my podcast numbers will double. So I might, if I have 50 by noon, I know it's going to be a good day. Okay. But, maybe by 4 o'clock, I have 60 or 70. Okay. By 7 or 8 o'clock, I'll have almost 200. So just by looking at that, I've realized that most people are listening to it very likely on their commute home from work. And so when do your listeners listen? That should be when you launch your episode. And a lot of people will say, just make that your launch time. But since I figured out that you can change your launch time just by, a flick of a switch. Okay. It's new to people who are at 6 a.m. and it's new to people who are, going home. And it takes me about 3 minutes to do it. All right. So it's yep.
That doesn't change your sequence as far as episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 10?
It does change my sequence. So okay. I do have to go back in. And so the little trick I've done on that one is usually what I do is, and I did not do it on this one, but I'll go back and do it. But what I usually do on the episodes is somewhere in the show notes. Let's see. Here's one that I brought back up to the front. Released December 16th. Okay. And so to put this back in the right order. All right. Put this back in the right order. I just go back to December 16th. I only released one episode that day, so the time doesn't matter. I hit publish. All right. And that is back in the right order now. So usually, on the Tuesdays and Thursdays that I bring these forward, I will reset last week's and move those back in the right spot. So, but yeah, if I didn't do that, you'd look at my podcast and we just released episode 90. You'd see like 90, 89, 22, 33, 42, 87, a whole string of random numbers. But yeah, I do go back and I'll put them back in order when I'm done.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
All right. I think that was my last, integrations. I kind of already talked about the integration. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to record, repurpose your content, that's really, okay. That was the unfinished slide that I stopped at when I thought I was done. But end of the day, there's a lot of things you can do to make a podcast work for you. All right. But the key is to put a lot of the effort up front before you start recording to figure out how this podcast is going to work for you. Now, if you all do me a favor, get that phone back out, basically, you tap on my podcast.
I mean, you got a on the line here. What do you want to ask her?
In your apartment, that's today's episode. But
these partnerships with your investor. I'm a responsible person. I'm going to be transparent, and here's how we're going to do right by you.
All right, you go to the show and you scroll all the way down, tap the 5 stars, and type something really, really cool about my podcast in there. All right. And then do that for Julie's podcast, and then do it for Heath and Hutch's podcast. And quite frankly, if you're a listener to a podcast, the best thing you can do is probably tell a friend about the podcast. All right. The second best thing you can do is leave a 5-star rating and a positive review on there. All right. So if you really want to help a podcaster out, those are the 2 things you do. Tell a friend and leave a rating and review. And, if I'd very much appreciate it if you guys all did that right now. But on Apple, you go to the podcast, go to show, scroll all the way down. And the more episodes somebody has, the more you have to scroll. I wish Apple would fix that, but they haven't yet. So fortunately, I've only got 90. I'm not like Joe Fairless, who has like 1,600 or 2,000. I don't know where he's at right now. Yeah, rate and review. And that's all I got. Sorry, I went a little bit over, but I got excited. Man, really excited.
This is amazing stuff. Yeah, I have to say, whenever we started our podcast, there was about 6 months solid where just posting every day, and had little clips. Even found out that Constant Contact, our CRM, can post from our business account to LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, but you can't it won't post to your personal account. But I think I've since learned other services that will do that. But yeah, it's just a lot of time and effort to get that out as much as possible.
So I pay someone to do it. I'll be honest. My podcast editor, AKA my daughter, my firstborn, I pay her, and part of her per episode charge is she loads it. We use Buffer as our poster. She loads the episode art in Buffer. She knows exactly what to type up for every episode, and she sets it to launch at 9 a.m. every morning. All right. And it goes to my personal accounts. It depends on what the content is, but our podcast stuff is going to my LinkedIn personal account. We have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter podcast account. So it's posting on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter every single day. And I have her posted at 9 o'clock because the days that I'm at the Pentagon, I usually get up and go for a walk around 9 o'clock. You can't just sit down at your desk all day. And I'll grab my phone. I'll walk out to the one spot in the Pentagon where I have self-service. And what I will do is I will tag the people on the post. Okay, so Buffer doesn't allow you to tag people. So she'll write their names in it. Yeah, I'll go up and I'll log into LinkedIn really quickly, and I will tag that day's guest so that they can see it. And then I'll go into Instagram. And if I'm following them or they're following me on Instagram, I'll tag them on the Instagram account. I don't do a lot on Twitter. To be honest, I just throw things up there because I'm throwing things up on other services. But maybe in the future we'll be a little more active on Twitter. And I don't do a lot on the Facebook account either. But the point is people will start seeing it. And if people know your brand's there and they're on Twitter and thinking, I wonder if Diary of Apartment Investor's on Twitter, without doing anything, I'm probably up to a whole 20 followers on Twitter, right? It's not a lot, but it cost me absolutely nothing to do. And a long time ago, I was wondering why people like Michael Blanc would post on LinkedIn and not do anything to engage, And I'm just thinking that's the dumbest thing, posting without engagement. But we hired a marketer, and he basically said, if you're going to post on LinkedIn, you might as well post it everywhere else. And if nothing else, you're going to get social proof. If you have one guy who happens to see it on Twitter and follows you, it's worth the extra 3 seconds it took to post it on both. But anyway.
How'd you got to get on that Twitter? I don't know. I've never tweeted anything.
Yeah, Twitter was kind of toxic, but I think we should be good now.
Yeah,
I'm not on Twitter, but I'm getting on that TikTok. I don't dance. You know what I mean? Gangsters don't dance, so just pull up my pants and lean back, right?
yeah.
Just play it. Yeah. Yes, I like TikTok, but definitely LinkedIn is definitely our space to go, and I'm trying to push that thing more on our Facebook as well. So yeah.
Have any of your loyal listeners been frustrated by the old new episode? Julie, I don't think so. And I think it depends on so on my phone with Apple Podcasts, if I've listened to it already, it does not appear back at the top. Okay, that's the default for Apple Podcasts. You have to actually go in and change your settings to bring an episode that you've already listened to back onto your phone. Okay, so I'm guessing that, maybe some people might look at it and say, oh, I've listened to this before. But I haven't heard anybody complain. So if you hear anybody complain, let me know. But I think right now I'm getting more people than I'm losing every time I do it.
That Brian, that was the one thing that I was talking with somebody. We were just bouncing ideas, and I just said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And that was the one thing concern, because I couldn't find the downside to it. I'm like, "This is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant." But that was their one, like, how are your listeners? But
yeah. And in my Throwback Thursday episode, when I do my social media posts, I make it clear this is an old one. It's hard to do that on Apple Podcasts I guess I could go in and show note it up and just say, hey, this is the Throwback Thursday episode. But I usually don't. But yeah, when I post it on LinkedIn, when I post it on Instagram, I'll say, hey, Throwback Thursday episode of the week is, and I'll drop a link to the particular episode, and then anybody who's not on LinkedIn or Instagram following me, if they're subscribed to my podcast, they'd look at their phone and, oh, hey, look, Kent and Esty. That was my Throwback Thursday episode from last week. I think Julie and Monique's, I think I put yours up as my Throwback Thursday episode twice. But
and I'll say, Brian, I tried this tactic and it totally makes a difference. And then I kind of shied away because I was like, oh, I don't want to upset anybody. But now I'm kind of convinced to go back to it because it really makes a difference.
Yeah, once again, it's what listeners, you look at your listeners' habits, and I look at my own habits to determine what my listeners are, because hey, guess what? I am part of my avatar. Okay. My avatar group are busy professionals between 35 and 45-year-old. And my avatar is actually gender specific, because in most households, it's the male that does a lot of the investing activities, right? But I also try to appeal to females as well, and that's you've seen a big push on my podcast to get as many females.
You can see you, Angel.
Yeah, but yeah, she's like,
we can see
I saw it too, Hutch.
Yeah, but that's everybody's avatar is going to be different. All right, everybody's avatar is going to be a little bit different, and everybody naturally appeals to a different category, and a lot of times like attracts like. Okay, you are most likely to be attracted to somebody who looks like you than somebody who doesn't. Okay, and you look at grade school, boys congregate on one side, girls congregate on the other side. It happens everywhere you go. So me saying my avatar is male, hey, that's just how it works. I'm not excluding by any stretch of the imagination. All right, but I target. That's what I'm targeting in general.
Yeah, and if you hear Adam Adams talk about it, that he's like, you got to get very specific about your avatar. And Adams is like, yeah, my avatar is a 42-year-old engineer who's Indian. Who has a wife and 2 kids between 6 and 10, and it's like very, very. He's like, that's my avatar. That's who I would go and who I would have a beer with. And I'm like, man, that seems like very, 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 very exclusive. But at the same time, I guess the point in doing that is that you become very clear with your messaging, and that's one of the upsides to doing that.
Yeah,
hey, Brian, while we have you, can we ask you? So, if Hutch and I, when we were doing our research on how to launch a podcast and doing a podcast, we came to a decision point. The decision was record a lot of episodes and then come up with a launch date. And then 2 months after that, hype it up, plug it, and then just drop like 8 episodes at once. Or we recorded 2 episodes and dropped the first one after the second one was recorded, because part of what we wanted to do was not give ourselves any excuses to prolong the podcast. And so as Julie mentioned on an episode she just dropped in the chat, her guest did it the right way. She says she's denied, but I don't know, Julie. I think you did. Your podcast is pretty out
So
there.
Here's my philosophy on that one. It depends on whether or not you have a following already or not. All right. I think that's the biggest thing. If you don't have a following, it doesn't matter. Okay. I mean, you're building your following with your podcast. All right.
That's right.
I mean, we had a little bit of a following inside the Michael Blanc coaching program. Eric and I were both advisors. Okay. So there were a lot of Michael Blanc, coaching students who would look to us for advice. So inside that program, we had a little bit of a following. On LinkedIn, I had built up a little bit of a following. All right. So had I 0 following, my marketing efforts would have been, abysmal. But, at the time I probably had, around 2,000 followers on LinkedIn. I'd probably average, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 views on every LinkedIn post that went out. So, my philosophy was I'm going to drop 6 or 8 episodes. I think we dropped 6 or 8 is the answer. Okay. We dropped 6 or 8 the first day. And we wanted to give anybody who listened an opportunity to listen to multiple episodes, to binge if they wanted to, or listen to 5 minutes of this one and 6 minutes of that one and just kind of scroll through. Okay. So that's what we wanted to do. But, once again, it depends on where you're starting. Okay. Michael Becker. Okay. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's the host of the Old Capital podcast. He's got a large following. He just started a new podcast. And if you've got a huge following, it's really easy to just start that new podcast and say, hey, everybody, I've got a new podcast. Put it in your rotation. So it really depends on where you're starting out from. If nobody knows who you are, it doesn't matter if you drop 1 episode a week or 8 episodes at once. All right. You're building the following as you go. And, the 3 people who are with you day 1 might have to wait a week. All right. But week 2, you have 5 people. Week 3, you have 10 people, and you keep on building and it goes from there. So I don't think there's a wrong answer. We chose to do 8 in a row. And like, if you look at let's go back to okay. You guys still see the screen?
Yes.
I should have taken off share screen, but if you look at this, because of that 8 in a row, we had a big bump our first weekend. I think we had like 1,000 downloads in 3 days. All right. And then everything went back down because 8 episodes out. I might be 5. We probably had 500 in 3 days, 1,000 in the first week. No, 2,000 in the first month. I don't know what we had, but it was, we had a big lump that first week. And it seemed like every other day we were getting a notification from Buzzsprout saying you hit the next milestone. But, it looks like on this graph, we had 2,000 in July. So probably 500 the first week is 500 the first weekend is probably about what we had. But, once again, depending on where you're starting, one method might be better than the others. And where we were starting, we figured that, we'd get more people hooked if we gave them a lot of content at once.
Yeah. That seems to be the general.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, Michael Blanc also had us speak at his Dealmaker Live in July. We timed the launch of our podcast with Dealmaker Live because we were on a stage in front of a lot of people who were potential listeners. And that's when we launched. And so we launched like a week before Dealmaker Live, specifically so that when the people at Dealmaker Live went back to the podcast, there'd be 8 or 10 episodes for them. And that's, we actually did pretty well getting new listeners from that one event.
Excellent. All right. Well, does anybody have any other questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask while you got Brian here.
Hey, I did have a question. So how do you feel? I don't know if you're familiar with Clubhouse, because they're pushing Clubhouse as like the next, like taking over for podcasts with Clubhouse. Just curious to see what your thoughts were.
So, Clubhouse can be, it's a tool is all it is. Okay. Clubhouse is a tool. Podcast is a tool. You go back to your avatar. Okay. Who are you trying to reach and where can you reach that person? All right. If that person is on Clubhouse, then yeah, figure out a way to go on Clubhouse, but you can do a podcast. And one thing that I'm trying to figure out how to do is how to record a podcast and broadcast it on Clubhouse at the same time. But really what I'm trying to do is the same thing that I'm doing with everything else, is try to repurpose the same content onto multiple formats. I haven't figured out how to do it on Clubhouse yet, but my thoughts on Clubhouse is it is a tool that has a lot of potential. I have not put a lot of time and effort into it, but I know a lot of people that have amassed a lot of followers already. The question is, are those followers going to get into that funnel? And that's really, really what we haven't put a lot of thought into is how do we get people who are in Clubhouse to go to our website and eventually become investors or join the community that we're creating. So.
Can I chime in on that? Because I've been trying to figure out how to maximize Clubhouse myself. And I was trying to see if there was a hack, and we've got some other podcasters on here and YouTubers and such. So like, how could we be recording an episode, right? Record the podcast episode, but at the same time have it streaming to Clubhouse, because Clubhouse, it's not engagement. So they're just listening in general, right? I mean, any thoughts on that?
That's one thing that I've actually thought about is, basically I have my phone right here. I have my microphone right here. If I set both of them up together, this one's capturing stuff for Clubhouse. This one's capturing stuff for the podcast. Theoretically, it can be done, but your guest would have to also have the same setup. And I don't know, my timing for podcasts, I think I guess you don't have to be regular with Clubhouse, but I think it'd be nice with Clubhouse to have something that everybody can expect, every Tuesday at 8 p.m., or every, this meetup is, every Monday at a certain time. Anyway, I haven't quite cracked the nut on that one. I'm still debating whether or not, we should spend a lot of time on Clubhouse or not.
Okay, I have another question I'm going to ask, and that is, what do you think about streaming live? I've been toying with the idea of streaming live every podcast, recording an episode, so that it's already out there, it's live, but just not letting it stay out there. I don't know. Thoughts? Have you done it, Heath?
We haven't, but we were interviewed by ADPI and they did it.
Yeah. ADPI did it with me. Michael Blanc did it with me too. And Michael Blanc was streaming it live inside his closed Facebook group. So one thing, and this is something I learned from Adam Adams, is, what takes priority on Facebook and what takes priority on Instagram as far as what gets views. And Facebook and Instagram are pushing people towards live content. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you put live content on, and just look at your phone one day, the notifications that pop up. I get a lot of notification that says somebody's going live. And, oops, sorry. I mean, somebody goes live on my phone, I get a little pop-up notification and I can tap it and listen to them. All right. I think that's a great idea. We haven't started doing it yet. But, it's something that I think is a really, really good idea to do.
Might have to have a good internet connection for that though. Right, Julie?
Can't do it from far north.
You know what? You have to know that I literally, on my YouTube channel, which I haven't promoted, but I added the blooper reel of me going outside to finish. But yeah, I have a post right now asking, so everybody's telling me to go to Starlink. So we put a request in.
When we started the podcast, I'm in the basement of my house right now, and it's probably the worst spot for where the router was. But we do our internet through Verizon, and we literally called Verizon up and said, what is the best router you can send us? You know, and now I've got one router upstairs, one router downstairs. That's not part of the cost that I said as the podcast. And then we also said, what's the fastest internet you can get, you can send us, you know? So just to make sure that my audio and video come through crystal clear, and I still have problems, you know, I hate it, but I still have problems. That's what we tried to do, but we're not in far north Idaho. But we're moving to Idaho.
Oh, go ahead, Hutch. Go ahead, Hutch.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I was having that same conversation in regards to the Clubhouse and doing the podcast. I'm launching mine on February the 17th. And I think, Brian, it's exactly what you said. Like, thank you. I appreciate that. So I think what you said is exactly right. Having the phone in one hand and recording it, letting the room know it's being recorded, and talking is a way. I'm not sure if the guest really needs to have it. My idea was to do it as like a Q&A on the back end. So the audience knows the whole time we'll be talking solo. And then when the Q&A opens, that's when the only catch is, my thought is that you need to have some kind of moderator, because it's really difficult to focus on whatever your next question is and digging in and worrying about, okay, I got to make sure this person's in line, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, doing the traditional podcast on Clubhouse, I think all you need is you and your guest to be on. I'm not sure how you do it without your guest on. But anyway, if you had you and your guest on, that works. And I think there's a lot of potential on it. You know, but the downside to Clubhouse is it's one and done. There's no repeats. It doesn't linger. Okay, you have a conversation, the conversation's over. Okay, so that's the downside. The nice thing about podcasts is you can record anytime, and it sits there forever. You can send it if there's a podcast episode that you really want somebody to listen to, you can cut and paste a link into a text or an email, send it to them, and they can listen to it 18 years from now, right? So that's the one thing with Clubhouse that is a little more difficult, is it is all live, and unless you're recording through like a different system, like the mic right here, it's going to disappear as soon as that word leaves your mouth.
The other thing was, you're absolutely right on the live piece. I've read quite a few articles in regards to Instagram, Facebook, and now YouTube going really heavy on the live. That's why now you see on Instagram, they are allowing people to have badges if they've done enough lives. So they're actually monetizing the lives as well as they're doing everything else. So, in the future, as you're doing your stuff, your stories on Instagram and your lives, all that's going to be really important here in the near future. Just a prediction from a nobody.
I don't think you're wrong. I did a challenge about a year ago. I mean, it was pre-COVID because I was going to the Pentagon every day. But it was about a year ago where somebody challenged, 30 days where you do a Facebook Live, and I'm like, all right, whatever, I'll do it. So I did the 30-day Facebook Live, and I got a lot of traction with that. The problem was, after the 30 days was over, I'm like, all right, challenge complete. And I stopped doing it. But, it was one of those things where, I literally created 30 days, sat down and said, okay, I mapped out the 30 days worth of content. What am I going to talk about day one? And I had a 30-day map of what I was going to talk about every day, which, quite frankly, I probably should do that with everything all the time. But after the 30 days was done, we had a lot of people reach out to us during those 30 days, a lot of traction. And I think, same thing. If you broadcast your stuff live, more people are going to get to it. And I thought about, I have these short Ask the Expert episodes. I thought about, talking to Julie about this earlier, I have recorded some of them, most of them I just speak right into my editing software and just, those are the only episodes that I edit myself. The interview episodes my daughter does. But I've thought about doing those live, and I've thought about recording those and posting the recordings as reels on Instagram or on LinkedIn. And it's just one more thing. I mean, personally, and not everybody's like me, this is what I realize, you know, if somebody puts a video, and here's something that I definitely need to do if I start posting more videos, is caption, subtitles. All right. Most of the time when I'm walking around with my phone and I'm looking at my phone on social media, my audio's off. All right. So I'm scrolling through, and if somebody has a video that doesn't catch my attention in the first 3 seconds and it doesn't have subtitles, I keep going. But yeah, that's just another one of those little hacks that I do a lot of. So I don't know. I looked at the screen for a second, and I got Julie looking this way on one, and I had Angel looking this way at the same time. It looked like you two were talking to each other, and it was anyway. That just that distracted me. But it literally looked like Julie and Angel were having a conversation because they were both, you know, for half a second pointed the same way. But
we're both talking to our kids, but we both speak the same language. So.
Yeah. So anyway, that completely derailed me. I have no idea what I was talking about before.
I like that.
But,
Maybe we can do our Zoomy that way, where Hutch. Well, on my screen, I got Heath, me, Julie, Brian, Angel, Glenn, so on and so forth, right? So maybe we can get everyone to. I'll tell you what to look
like
left
a Brady
or right.
Bunch thing where everybody.
Let's do that. All right. So Heath, can you look to your left? Let's do the zoomy. So if your camera's off, can you turn the camera on, please? Let's do the zoomy. And we'll move it. All right. So other way, Julie. Okay, Brian, look to your right.
My right.
There you go. All right, Julie, look to your left. Angel, look to your left. Glenn, look to your right. Vinky, right. Military right, dear Glenn. Vinky, can you look to your left? Oliver, look to your right. Lamb, look to your left. Mona, look to your right. Robert, look down. You're gonna be looking. You're gonna be looking down at Yeah, she says she's not looking. I'm not looking. All right, Anti-Gay, you look up. There we go. Okay, actually, Robert, now you can look to your left. And Anti-Gay, look to your right, Anti-Gay. Look to your right. Look to your right, Anti-Gay. You're right.
This is worse than a real selfie, dude.
There we go. Okay, perfect.
Did you get it?
Yeah, hurry up, take it.
Got it. Hold on. What the hell? It didn't go.
All right, everybody look back.
Okay, about to look back. Yep. Thank you. Oh yeah, it did go.
All right.
Thanks a lot. That's the weirdest selfie I've ever taken.
Tons of fun. I love it.
Yeah, it's like grade school pictures all over again.
Right.
Or it's like a podcast cover. I don't know.
Yeah.
Great information, Brian. I really appreciate that. I know we're past the hour, so if you need to go, but if you want to stick around for 2 5-minute networking session, let's do that. I think we have waited long enough for that. You know, Brian, really appreciate you coming through, and it's a solid information that I'm pretty sure that everyone who is currently running a podcast or a prominent member of Clubhouse or is thinking about running a podcast will get some value from it. And I appreciate that. You know, so Heath, you want to break us out?
Yes.
Actually, we can do a plug. Let's steal this from Brian. If you have a plug, 10, 11 seconds, and plug your podcast, plug your show, plug your meetup. Start with Julie.
I dropped a link in. So if you want to start a podcast, seriously, that episode is gold because Josh and I go back and forth on the different ways. So like, is it worth it to pre-launch? And he was very careful, even though he didn't have a huge following. So if you're going to launch a podcast, seriously, I wish I had that episode.
All right. Uncle Brian.
Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast is the best podcast in the world. I mean, if you guys haven't figured that out already, I don't know. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Angel.
I just put everything in the chat. I'm fixing to like push it through. I heard that there were some bad things to the link. Like Aaron this morning was like, I couldn't get on. So I'm going to try and update the link. But other than that, everything will be in the chat and you should come and join me on all the stuff we do.
All right. Uncle Glenn, you want to tell us about your prior service? No. Okay. Vinky, Mom.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm starting my podcast and I can use all the help. And Brian and myself had quite a bit chat the other day. And Julie, I'm sorry you couldn't get to the link that you posted in the chat. If you please do that again, maybe I wanted to listen to that as well. And my podcast is on, the name is Vibe, is mind, body, and entrepreneurship. So that, we can help people to understand what's going on in their mind and what's stopping them doing whatever they wanted to do in their life.
It is. All right, Oliver. Thank you. And thank you, Mom.
Absolutely. Follow me on IG at The Oliver Perry. And I'm launching my podcast on February 17th. It'll be called The Oliver Perry Show. Brian has already interviewed for it. I still got to catch Hutch and Heath. And I'll probably catch the rest of you too if you're not paying attention. So I look forward to seeing you there. And thank you.
All right. Lem, anything? You muted, brother?
Thanks for having me. It was great. Thanks.
Appreciate you, Kevin. Ms. Mona?
I just want to plug my son's podcast, NFL podcast, and it's called the Always 100 Podcast. Comes on Thursday, so he'll be doing a Super Bowl show this week.
Boom.
Awesome.
Brother Robert?
I don't have a podcast. I do have a book, so I'm writing it away. So no podcast yet, but I'm excited. You all, I'm gonna try to support you all's podcast and share it out there best way I can.
I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Sound like you're piggybacking on Julie's internet.
Man, I tell you, these Marines nowadays, I tell you.
Oh yeah, I'll do a quick plug for myself there, Hutch. Retired Marine, 20 years software engineer. Now I'm retired and going into continuing with real estate. I do note investing, gap funding for single family and multifamily passive. So I'm all over the board.
Thank you,
Oh,
brother.
Brian, one thing, Brian, you're old enough, I think, that you remember these old drawings where they always have Elroy was here, where you just see his eyes over the fence and his hands.
Yeah.
I keep expecting to see hands come up over your frame of your image.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, we wanted to make the image something that made people stop. All right. And the half of a head was the original episode, Eric and I were supposed to tag team that. And you had one head coming in on this side, one head coming in on this side, and you just see eyes up. It's also like Tool Time. What's that show? Wilson.
Home
yeah.
Home improvement. Yeah.
Home improvements, yeah.
That's what we were thinking was
Last
the home
Man
improvements.
Standing.
Yeah. But it's this is what you see, and it's something that makes people stop. And that's what we wanted with the artwork was scrolling. Why does he only have half a head?
Well, it actually gathered my attention there and made me wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
is he really working in the Pentagon?
Yeah. That's what I thought. That's what I thought it was associated with, just confidential. I could just get in a peek. Can I get a peek?
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else got anything to pitch? All right. So 2021, right? It's the year that you get your ask in gear, right? Not bad word. You get your ask in gear. So what I really want to ask is that if you have a podcast here, if you listen to anyone podcast here, please get on there, give them a rating that you think they deserve based on the episodes that you have listened to, and also take some time to 5 minutes to write a review, 2 sentences, 3 sentences. This episode is a bomb, best podcast I've listened to in a while, whatever the case may be, and so we can get it out to more people. I really appreciate you joining us today, and looking forward to many more information being learned amongst ourselves in the coming year. Next week, we have Julie Peterson that will be talking about lending in multifamily properties. And I believe after that, we have maybe Travis Watts to talk about private passive investing. Actually, Heath's about to correct me on that one. What you got, Heath?
Let's see. Julie, then Travis, then Dan Krasinowski.
Talk about
Rocket Dollar.
Yeah, Rocket Dollar, how to rocket your dollar. So little known fact. I mean, a lot of folks doesn't take advantage of this, but as far as taking control of your retirement funds, right? We so used to keeping our stuff on Wall Street. But Rocket Dollar kind of they show you how to move it onto Main Street so you can you can have more leverage with your money, right? Get more leverage with your money. Investing in gold, silver, real estate, which we like, right?
Comedy
I saw-
tours.
Yeah. So without further
GameStop,
ado,
silver.
yeah. Without further ado, let's roll 2 5 minutes into the breakout rooms. Let's do it right now.